How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. By Bill Gates. How we grow things. Did you know that raising animals for food is a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions? This sector is responsible for more than 80% of all greenhouse gases in agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. The main culprits are methane and nitrous oxide, which cause more warming than carbon dioxide. Each year, these emissions are equivalent to more than 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide. This is a significant challenge as we strive towards net zero emissions. We need to find ways to grow plants and raise animals, while reducing and eventually eliminating greenhouse gases. But it's not just about animal agriculture. Deforestation and other land use activities also add to carbon emissions and destroy essential wildlife habitats. Feeding a growing population. In 1968, Paul Ehrlich wrote a book predicting mass starvation in the 1970s and 1980s. He was wrong. The global population has grown by more than 800 million people since 1968. But food production has kept pace and even surpassed it in many parts of the world. Norman Borlaug, a brilliant plant scientist, developed varieties of wheat that provided much more food per acre of land. His work led to a revolution in agriculture that saved 1 billion lives. As the global population heads towards 10 billion by 2100, we'll need even more food to feed everyone. Meat and dairy production will require us to grow even more plants. For example, a chicken needs to eat 2 calories worth of grain to give us 1 calorie of poultry. The more calories we get from meat, the more plants we need to grow for the meat. Innovation will be key in meeting the challenges of feeding a growing population. We need to develop new ways of producing food sustainably. Reducing emissions from livestock farming. Cow burps and pig manure may seem like a laughing matter, but they are significant contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. Cattle alone account for 4% of all global emissions. Researchers have tried various methods to reduce methane emissions from cattle. One promising solution is a compound called 3-nitrooxypropanol, which reduces emissions by 30%. Did you know that the amount of methane produced by a cow depends on where it lives? Cattle in South America emit up to 5 times more greenhouse gases than ones in North America do. We can spread improved breeds and best practices to reduce emissions, especially in Africa. This will help poor farmers earn more money while reducing emissions. Plant-based meat. Plant-based meat is a great alternative to animal meat. It's better for the environment, requires less grain, and is a huge boon for animal welfare. Artificial meats come with hefty green premiums, but as sales increase, they'll eventually be cheaper than animal meat. This is a great way to cut down on meat eating while still enjoying the taste of meat. Plant-based meat is already making waves in the market. Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods have had successful IPOs, and their products are widely available. But what about cell-based meat? It's created in a lab, and it has the same fat, muscles, and tendons as any animal on 2 or 4 legs. Reducing food waste is another way to cut down on emissions. In the United States, 40% of food is wasted, causing as much warming as 3.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year. Technology can help reduce food waste too. Edible, plant-based coatings can extend the life of fruits and vegetables. And smart bins can track how much food is wasted in a house or business. Synthetic fertilizer. Synthetic fertilizer was a key factor in the agricultural revolution that changed the world in the 1960s and 1970s. It's estimated that if we couldn't make synthetic fertilizer, the world's population would be 40 to 50% smaller than it is. Poor countries should be using more fertilizer. In Africa, the typical farmer gets just 1/5 as much food per acre of land as an American farmer gets. Synthetic fertilizer provides plants with essential nutrients, including nitrogen, which is especially relevant to climate change. Adding nitrogen is how you get corn to grow 10 feet high and produce enormous quantities of seed. The Haber-Bosch process made it possible to create synthetic fertilizer, greatly expanding both the amount of food that could be grown and the range of geographies where it could be grown. It's still the main method we use to make ammonia today. The environmental impact of synthetic fertilizers. The microorganisms that make nitrogen expend a lot of energy in the process. When we add synthetic fertilizer, the natural organisms in the soil sense the nitrogen and stop producing it on their own. Synthetic fertilizer production requires heat, which we get by burning natural gas, and transportation via gasoline-powered trucks. Plus, the nitrogen that it contains never gets absorbed by the plant and causes pollution. In fact, fertilizers were responsible for roughly 1.3 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions in 2010. And there simply isn't a practical zero-carbon alternative for fertilizer right now. But there's hope. Researchers are developing new varieties of crops that can recruit bacteria to fix nitrogen for them, and some companies have developed genetically modified microbes that fix nitrogen. Deforestation and climate change. Deforestation is a global problem that contributes to 30% of emissions from farming, forestry, and other land use. It's a complex issue that's happening for different reasons in different parts of the world. In Brazil, deforestation is driven by clearing pasture land for cattle, while in Africa, it's for growing food and fuel for the growing population. In Indonesia, forests are cut down to make way for palm trees that provide palm oil for everyday products. The impact of deforestation is not just about releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It also disturbs the soil, releasing stored carbon into the atmosphere. Stopping deforestation requires political and economic solutions, including paying countries to maintain their forests and making sure rural communities have different economic opportunities. The complex impact of planting trees. Planting trees is often cited as a solution to global warming. But the impact of planting trees is more complex than it seems. The amount of carbon dioxide a tree can absorb varies, but on average, it's around 4 tons over 40 years. The tree's lifespan and location also affect its impact on global warming. Trees in snowy areas can cause more warming than cooling, while trees in tropical forests cause more cooling than warming. And if a tree would have grown there naturally, planting it doesn't add extra carbon absorption. Replacing a farm with a forest can also have unintended consequences. Reducing the total amount of soybeans available can drive up their price, leading to deforestation elsewhere. So, while planting trees has benefits, it's not a practical solution to deal with the problems caused by burning fossil fuels. The most effective strategy is to stop cutting down the trees we already have. To address the challenge of producing 70% more food while reducing emission, we'll need new ideas and changes in habits. We'll need to eat less meat and waste less food.